Black waitress says, "Sir, this is my mother's signature." Billionaire CEO freezes in shock. Paris, a city often painted in postcards of elegance and light, can sometimes conceal the sharpest shadows. Beneath the grandeur of its boulevards and marble interiors, lives unfold quietly, often unseen, and sometimes unheard. In this city, Naomi Carter moved through her days with the kind of invisibility that came not from choice, but from the uniform she wore. A crisp white shirt, a black apron, and polished shoes. The attire of a waitress in one of the most exclusive dining halls in the French capital. To the wealthy patrons who passed through the doors of the Crystal Horizon restaurant, she was part of the background. Trays balanced on her arm, water glasses filled before they ran dry, smiles offered politely, then forgotten as quickly as the last sip of wine. But to Naomi, every step, every shift was a battle. She was not just working for tips. She was working for survival, for dignity, and for a grandmother who had carried her through the storms of her life. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share a word of love in the comments. Her story began far from Paris. Naomi was born in Chicago, raised in a modest home where her mother, Dr. Evelyn Carter, was the beating heart of the household. Evelyn was not just a mother, but a brilliant scientist, a woman who had poured her soul into renewable energy research when most of the world had yet to take it seriously. Naomi remembered nights when her mother would come home, her lab coat dusted with chalk marks and her eyes alive with ideas. She spoke of harnessing the sun, of building something that could outlast oil and coal, something that could change lives. But that light went out far too soon. When Naomi was just a child, men in suits came to the door. Their words were clinical, rehearsed, heavy. An explosion, a lab accident. No remains to bury, only a sealed urn and a check that insulted the brilliance her mother had carried. Naomi's grandmother, Loretta, clutched her tight as tears rolled down her face. Naomi never believed the story, not fully. There was always a hollowness in the explanation, a missing piece that gnawed at her as she grew older. Years later, when the name Elijah Morgan began dominating headlines, Naomi felt an unease she couldn't explain. Here was a man praised as a genius, the billionaire who had revolutionized solar energy and built a global empire. Reporters painted him as self-made, a visionary. Yet when Naomi saw the diagrams flashing across television screens, she felt a sting of recognition. They looked like sketches her mother had once pinned above their kitchen table. But suspicion without proof is like a whisper in a storm. Naomi had no evidence, only memories. And memories, she learned, were easy for the powerful to dismiss. So she pushed them down, focused on survival, and found herself in Paris, a waitress earning just enough to keep her grandmother's bills paid back home. At the Crystal Horizon, she was often invisible, except when her presence became a reminder of race in a place where black women rarely held anything other than a tray. She heard the subtle comments, the condescending tones, the raised eyebrows when she spoke French with fluency. Some customers ignored her entirely, treating her as though she were part of the furniture. Others looked at her with quiet suspicion, as though she were an intruder in their world of chandeliers and fine wines. Yet Naomi endured, because she had no other choice. She worked long nights, polished marble floors with her steps, and kept her pain buried. But deep inside, the ghost of her mother's unfinished story followed her. It was on an ordinary evening, when German investors filled Table 12 and the air buzzed with the language of money and deals, that Naomi's life began to shift. She had been tidying the back office when her hand brushed against a folder left slightly ajar. Harmless at first glance, but curiosity tugged at her. Inside were blueprints, pages of careful lines, numbers, and signatures. Her breath caught, because at the bottom of one page, written in a familiar hand she hadn't seen since childhood, was a name that stopped time. Dr. Evelyn Carter. Naomi's pulse quickened, her hands trembling as the weight of the discovery pressed against her chest. Here it was, the missing piece. Proof that her mother's work hadn't vanished in that so-called accident. Proof that the empire built by Elijah Morgan was not the story the world believed. She closed the folder, heart hammering, and looked around the restaurant, the glittering chandeliers above mocking the storm inside her. Patrons laughed, glasses clinked, and the world went on as if nothing had changed. But Naomi knew her life would never be the same again. Because in that folder was not just her mother's signature. It was the spark of a truth that could ignite a fire powerful enough to burn through billions, reputations, and lies. The discovery of her mother's signature in that folder left Naomi shaken to her core. For years, she had carried suspicion like a shadow, but now, in her hands, was the first tangible proof that Evelyn Carter's brilliance had not been lost to fire and smoke. It lived, stolen, and repackaged under the name of Elijah Morgan, the billionaire mogul whose empire dazzled the world. Her heart pounded as she returned to the dining hall, tray in hand, but her eyes drifted again and again toward table 12. There he sat, Elijah Morgan himself, a towering presence in a tailored suit, laughter booming as German investors toasted glasses of Bordeaux. The man who had built an empire on sunlight looked untouchable. And yet, hidden in the folder Naomi had stumbled upon was evidence that his light was borrowed, not earned. Naomi's mind raced. She could have stayed silent, slipped the folder back where it belonged, and kept collecting tips. But something in her spirit refused to bend. She remembered her grandmother's words. "Your mother's genius was stolen the day they took her from us." Those words burned now like fuel. With trembling hands, Naomi approached the table. The chandeliers glittered above, but all she felt was the weight of her heartbeat echoing in her ears. She set the folder down gently, her voice unsteady yet loud enough to ripple through the room. She spoke of her mother's name, her signature, her legacy. The words tumbled into the air like thunder, silencing conversations across the restaurant. Elijah's face hardened. For a fraction of a second, disbelief flickered in his eyes. Then came the mask, the sharp laugh, the dismissive sneer. He barked orders to security, calling Naomi delusional, insisting she was trespassing into matters far above her station. His voice dripped with the entitlement of a man who had long believed himself immune to challenge, especially from a black waitress in an apron. The investors shifted uneasily, glancing between Naomi and the man they had come to trust with millions. And in that hesitation, Naomi seized her chance. She pulled out her phone, showing a photograph she had carried for years. Her mother, Evelyn, is smiling in a lab coat. Beside her stood a much younger Elijah Morgan, his hand resting on a table cluttered with sketches that looked hauntingly familiar. The date stamp on the photo was undeniable. A gasp rippled through the room. Elijah's glass slipped from his hand, shattering across marble, the echo cutting through the silence. The image was too sharp, the resemblance too clear. And for the first time in his carefully managed life, Elijah Morgan looked exposed. But power has a way of rewriting truth in real time. Within minutes, Naomi was dragged away, her uniform stripped of dignity, her employment terminated on the spot. The restaurant manager, bowing to Morgan's influence, accused her of fabricating lies to embarrass a guest. Naomi walked into the Paris night with nothing but the folder in her memory. Her job lost, her reputation smeared. The retaliation came swiftly. Her bank accounts froze, her applications for other work mysteriously rejected. Her name whispered on blacklists she could never see. Friends grew distant, afraid of being associated with someone targeted by a man whose wealth stretched across continents. Racism and power combined into a silent weapon. Naomi was not just discredited. She was erased. But Naomi refused to disappear. She returned to her grandmother's house, the same modest Chicago home where she had grown up. There, tucked away in an old trunk, were the remnants of Evelyn Carter's life. Journals, photographs, even cassette tapes filled with late-night thoughts. Loretta, now frail but still sharp, begged her to leave it buried. "They already took your mother," she warned. "They'll take you too." Yet Naomi's conviction deepened. Each page she turned revealed more of her mother's brilliance, and more proof of betrayal. She couldn't let Evelyn's name remain buried under Morgan's empire. It was then that she sought help from Daniel Hayes, an investigative journalist known for taking down corrupt senators. Naomi showed him the shaky video she had captured on her phone, Elijah's expression flickering when confronted with her mother's name. Daniel leaned back, eyes narrowed. "This is strong," he admitted, "but not strong enough. Men like Morgan don't fall from photographs and memories. They fall from evidence." Naomi leaned forward. "I have more," she whispered. Together, they tracked down Dr. Helena Ruiz, Evelyn's closest friend and colleague. Ruiz lived quietly, a shadow of her former self, haunted by secrets she had locked away for over 2 decades. At first, she resisted, fear etched into every line of her face. But when Naomi placed her mother's photograph on the table, Ruiz's hands shook. From a hidden compartment, she retrieved a locked box. Inside were flash drives, letters, and Evelyn's graduation ring. On one of those drives was a recording. Elijah's voice, cold and unmistakable, snarled through the speakers. "The technology will be mine, whether the easy way or the hard way, with or without you alive." Evelyn's reply followed, steady and defiant. "You may steal my work, Elijah, but you'll never steal my conscience." The tape cut off there, but the meaning was chilling. Naomi sat frozen, her heart pounding. It wasn't just about stolen research anymore. It was about murder, about silencing a woman whose only crime was brilliance. Daniel looked at her, his face pale. "If this is real," he said, "it won't just topple Morgan. It'll burn everything he's built." Naomi knew then that she had stepped beyond the point of no return. The question was no longer whether she would fight, but how much she was willing to lose. And as dawn broke over Paris, a storm was gathering. Naomi was about to strike at the very core of a billionaire's empire. But Morgan wasn't a man who surrendered quietly. He was a man who destroyed. The storm Naomi had feared finally broke. Once the recording surfaced, once Daniel Hayes began preparing his exposé, the machinery of Elijah Morgan's empire turned its full force on her. It began with whispers in the press. Anonymous sources painted her as unstable, a disgruntled employee seeking attention. Online articles questioned her credibility, twisting her story into fiction. Social media accounts suddenly filled with posts smearing her character, branding her a liar. The attack was deliberate, relentless, and racial in its undertones. A black waitress daring to accuse a billionaire could only, in their words, be reaching above her station. But Naomi refused to fade. She and Daniel pressed forward, contacting outlets, gathering more corroboration, building a wall of evidence. Every night, she lay awake, fear gnawing at her, but resolve burning hotter. She wasn't only carrying her mother's legacy anymore. She was carrying every silenced voice that had been dismissed, erased, or stolen. The breaking point came on a Monday morning. At dawn, the Paris Daily Tribune published the story online. Documents, photographs, and the audio recording spread across social media within hours. By mid-morning, headlines blazed across screens worldwide. Billionaire Elijah Morgan accused of stealing technology and covering up scientist's death. Chaos erupted. Novacore's stock collapsed, dropping by nearly half its value in a single day. Investors scrambled, their confidence shattered. Television anchors replayed Naomi's video, freezing on Elijah's face as the truth cracked through his carefully built mask. But the most shocking moment came hours later. Federal agents, armed with warrants, stormed Novacore's Berlin headquarters. Cameras swarmed as Elijah Morgan, the untouchable mogul, was led out in handcuffs. The man who had walked across stages to applause was shoved into a black SUV, his eyes wild with rage. The world watched, stunned. For Naomi, the moment was overwhelming. She stood in her small Paris apartment, phone buzzing non-stop with messages, tears sliding down her face as she realized the impossible had happened. A black waitress, dismissed and erased, had shaken the foundations of a billionaire's empire. Yet victory was not without cost. The backlash was immediate and it was brutal. Strangers sent her threats, calling her a liar, accusing her of destroying jobs and futures. Commentators debated whether her mother's death had been an accident or whether Naomi was fabricating for attention. Some praised her as a hero, while others reduced her to a target for ridicule and hatred. Still, Naomi pressed on. She stood before cameras at a press conference, flanked by Dr. Ruiz and other scientists who had long feared speaking out. Her voice did not waver as she declared, "My mother wasn't lost to an accident. She was silenced, but her name will not be forgotten again." The room erupted with questions, flashes from cameras blinding her. But Naomi's focus was steady. This was not just about her family anymore. It was about exposing a system where power and privilege could erase black brilliance, where legacies were stolen and rewritten by those who believed themselves untouchable. Journalists dug deeper. What they uncovered shook the world even further. At least 5 other suspicious lab accidents had coincided with Elijah Morgan's sudden breakthroughs. Each time, a scientist had disappeared or died under questionable circumstances. Each time, Morgan's empire expanded. The narrative of genius collapsed into one of predation and exploitation. Naomi watched as the tide shifted. The same media outlets that once painted her as unstable now clamored for interviews. Her name trended across continents, her story igniting debates about race, power, and stolen innovation. But for Naomi, the climax wasn't the headlines. It wasn't the stock crash, the handcuffs, or even the revelations. The true climax came late one evening, when she sat alone in her apartment, scrolling through messages. One in particular caught her breath. It was from a young black engineering student in South Africa. The message was simple. "Your mother's story is why I won't give up. Thank you for fighting for us." Naomi's hands trembled as she set the phone down. The weight of her fight, the years of silence, the danger she had faced. It all crystallized in that moment. Her mother's voice, once stolen, was alive again, echoing across borders and generations. But the fight was not over. Elijah Morgan, though jailed, had resources, allies, and influence still reaching into the shadows. The trial loomed, promising to be long and vicious. Naomi knew that exposing the truth was only the beginning. Justice was a battlefield, and she had only just stepped onto it. The world was watching. Millions waited to see whether a black woman's courage could truly rewrite history, whether Evelyn Carter's name would finally stand beside her work, or whether the machine of wealth and racism would find a way to bury the truth again. And as Naomi stood before a sea of cameras, her heart steady, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, she would not be silenced. The trial of Elijah Morgan stretched for months, each headline a reminder of how far Naomi's fight had carried her. Day after day, the courtroom peeled back the glittering facade of a billionaire who had built an empire on lies. Witnesses testified, documents were unveiled, and recordings were played for all to hear. And at the center of it all sat Naomi Carter, once invisible, now unignorable. When the verdict came, the silence in the courtroom was heavy. Elijah Morgan was sentenced to 3 life terms without parole. His estates in Monaco, Berlin, and Paris were seized. The family name he had once polished into gold became a stain his own relatives fled from, some even changing their identities to escape the shame. The man who had once silenced others was silenced himself, caged in the very system he had believed himself above. But Naomi's story did not end with his downfall. It began anew. Out of settlements, donations, and worldwide support, She founded the Carter Ruiz Institute for Innovation, a sanctuary for scientists whose voices might otherwise be overlooked. It was more than an institution. It was a living legacy, seated with nearly $1.9 billion in funding, and built on the belief that brilliance should never be buried because of race, class, or gender. Dr. Helena Ruiz, once fearful and hidden, became its director. Daniel Hayes, the journalist who had taken a risk by standing with Naomi, won a Pulitzer Prize for his coverage. And Loretta, Naomi's grandmother, finally found peace in her old age. For the first time in decades, she could say Evelyn's name without fear, knowing the world had finally heard her story. And yet, the impact stretched far beyond Naomi's family. Across universities and labs, young black scientists whispered Evelyn Carter's name like a promise. Her stolen research, once hidden in boardrooms and vaults, now inspired a new generation determined to claim their rightful place. The Carter Ruiz Institute offered scholarships, mentorships, and state-of-the-art labs, a platform designed not only to protect voices, but to amplify them. But even with victory, the shadow of injustice remained. Naomi knew her story was not unique. For every Evelyn Carter, how many others had been erased? How many discoveries stolen? How many voices buried? How many legacies rewritten under the weight of systemic racism and unchecked power? Her fight had proven something crucial, that even one voice, long dismissed, could ignite a movement. But it also revealed how fragile justice could be, how easily power could crush truth if left unchallenged. Naomi carried this lesson with her, repeating it in speeches, in interviews, in quiet moments with students at the Institute. Justice, she would say, is not a gift, it is a fight, and the fight never ends. Meanwhile, Elijah Morgan sat in prison, a spectator to the world he once controlled. He could not escape the news broadcasts showing the Carter Ruiz Institute's opening ceremonies, the headlines celebrating Evelyn Carter's restored legacy, the banners that read, "Her light lives on." Every mention of Naomi's name was a fresh reminder that the waitress he had once dismissed had rewritten his story, turning his empire into a cautionary tale. Naomi had sought truth, but what she built was bigger than truth. It was a legacy of resilience. Her mother's brilliance no longer belonged to whispers in the past. It belonged to the future. And Naomi had ensured that the next Evelyn Carter would never be erased again. The story leaves us with a question far larger than one man's downfall or one woman's triumph. How many more names are hidden in silence, their contributions buried under the weight of power and prejudice? How many legacies are we still losing even now? Naomi's journey reminds us that justice is more than exposing corruption. It is about rebuilding, restoring, and refusing to let history repeat its erasures. Her courage lit a path, but it is a path that others must continue walking. Because the truth is this: racism is not only about what is stolen, it is about what is silenced. And silence is a choice we cannot afford. So ask yourself, whose voices are you listening to, and whose are still waiting to be heard? You've just witnessed Naomi Carter's incredible journey, from a silenced waitress to the voice that exposed a billionaire and restored her mother's stolen legacy. But her story raises a powerful question. How many other voices have been erased? How many legacies stolen, without ever being uncovered? If the story moved you, if it made you think, or if it opened your eyes to hidden injustice, then don't let it end here. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us as we uncover more stories that deserve to be heard.